And also, hopefully during today, you'll like what you hear, you'll be interested, and if anyone at any point thinks, actually I could help out, there's stuff I could do to help grow the society, to help with your work, or I've got ideas of what you should be doing that you're not, come and speak to any of us and just let us know your interest and we'll get in touch with you going forwards. The other couple of key things about today, so obviously, as I said, first of all, just bringing everyone together, because some of the feedback from last year was that the main thing for people that they really enjoyed and got out of the day was just meeting other people. So what we've done today, we've got obviously food on at lunch and also this evening. So everyone, we want you to stay as long as you can, to chat, to mingle, and just make the most of the opportunity to speak to as many different people as you can today. Because I think that's often one of the main things that people get out of it. In terms of the other key aims for today, one, we want to educate and give people more information about the condition, the research. Russell's going to speak a little bit more about this in a minute, but we're really pleased again to have some of the world leaders in research speaking today, Patrick Chinnery and Uaiman, and both of them can give great insight into where things are up to and also help us understand a little bit more about the condition and the science of it. We also want to think about the society and as a rare disease, what we can do as a group of people, as a community, and so we'll be talking about that from a European level. We've got people from other European countries coming here representing their societies, and just to get us all thinking about, well, as a society, as a group, what can we do, what do we want to do going forwards? And then I suppose the other part of the day that's, again, a lot of feedback from last year is just about looking at how people are living with the condition at the moment. So as all of you will know, you'll either be affected by it yourself or you'll be here because you know someone that is. This is a condition, a visual impairment, that will completely change your life. It will take a lot of adjustment emotionally, practically, to learn how to deal with this. And we all experience life differently. We all want different things from life. So one of the things we have on today is we have a panel. So some of our members are going to be speaking about their experience of living with the condition. And last year, some of the feedback we had was, it was a really interesting panel, but it was very similar, the demographic. It was sort of males, sort of about the same age, about the same stage in life. So this year, we've taken that on, and we've got a bit more of a variety in terms of gender, age, stage people are at in life. And that's a really interesting part of the day where we'll hope you'll all be asking lots of questions and just listening to people and their experiences of living with the condition, the good, the bad, what they do to cope, the things they still find frustrating, and hopefully that'll trigger some more interesting conversations during the breaks and the meal at the end of the day as well. Another thing we've got today in terms of living with the condition is we're really pleased that Krista has come over from Sweden. So he's one of the founding members of the Swedish LHON Society, or their version of this. He's had the condition for 40 years. I mean, he'll be able to tell you exactly himself. But he's been doing some work over the last few years to develop a toolkit for living with this visual impairment. And him and some others have produced a book about that. So he'll be giving a presentation with his insights and his advice on what you can do to still live a fulfilling life, I suppose, and not let it become too big a barrier to how you're living with the condition. So again, I think that's going to be a really interesting talk and discussion from him. And throughout the day, with all the speakers, there's going to be lots of information, but we really want everyone to get involved and be engaged. So obviously, in terms of having questions, I mean, each speaker will, I'm sure, be willing to take questions, and there'll be a section for that. And that's just really important that people are thinking about it and asking questions and speaking to the other people on the table. So I suppose just before I hand over to Russell to talk a little bit as well about some of the speakers today, one of the things that will be happening simultaneously to our presentations is we have two technology companies here today. So for anyone that lives with the condition, to live independently, we'll all rely on technology, stuff on our smartphones, accessibility software, and some of the really exciting new bits of technology devices that are out at the minute come from Orcam and eSight. So they're both going to be here, and there's 2 rooms over there. So throughout the day, please just go in, talk to them. They'll demonstrate their product. They'll help you understand how it might be able to work for you. They can answer any questions. And it's just going to be just pop in and out, and they'll be here throughout the day. So if you could just come over. Mark? Ian from eSight will just say hello and quickly explain about the eSight glasses.
Morning, everybody. So my name is Ian Hughes, and I represent eSight here in the UK. You may have heard of eSight, you may not be aware. But what eSights are electronic glasses that were made originally by a gentleman for his 2 blind sisters who had gone blind through Stargardt's. And he was frustrated there was nothing on the market that did everything all in one unit. Because you can have a telescope for distance, you can have a magnifier for close, but nothing that they could wear and just go about their everyday life. So even though they were originally designed for Stargardt's, they have lent themselves to other eye conditions. And to be honest, we've had quite a big success in the UK with all the different eye conditions that are out there. How they work is there is a digital camera housed in the visor that I'm wearing, and what it will do is process the image and using different algorithms, put it onto 2 OLED screens that will sit in front of the eyes. What we can then do is manipulate that image through magnification, through contrast, focusing it, so that we can see things at the distance, close. We can also stream to it as well. We can put instead of looking through them to see the TV, we can actually see the TV or the laptop on the lenses in front. So, as James said, I'm going to be in the second room on the right. Feel free to come in throughout the day. Happily let you have a try, have a play with them, see if they make a difference. We do assessments all around the UK where you can spend a lot longer going through it, having a proper assessment, which is all free of charge, just to see if it makes any difference to you. Thank you.
Thank you. And Mark and Alexia in the room? Cool.
Thank you very much. Good morning, everybody. So my name's Alexia from Orcam. I've also got Ian with me today. So a little bit about what Orcam does. It's a little camera that sits on the right-hand or the left-hand side of the glasses. And the purpose of Orcam is to be able to enable you to read texts that are in front of you through relaying that to you in sound. So it picks up the image, translates it into sound, and relays it into your ear. So you could read things such as newspapers, magazines, road signs, things in the supermarket that you can't normally see. So it really enables you to do all those things, again, that normally you may need to ask somebody else to help with. Also, we have 2 different types of Orcam. We have a My Reader that does all the things I just mentioned, and we also have a My Eye. So the My Eye also does facial recognition and product recognition. So what that means is you can program your family and friends in there, you can put in certain objects that you couldn't normally recognise, and the Orcam will announce to you what's in front of you. Colours is another thing that's been introduced recently, and money notes. So Ian and I are going to be situated in the room on the right-hand side. So do come along, you can put the glasses on, have a little practice. And then, yeah, we're very friendly, so do come in and have a chat. Right, thank you.
Brilliant. Thank you very much. So, as I was saying, as they'll be here throughout the day, feel free to come in and out of the talks if you just want to go and grab them. It's all quite relaxed. We just want you all to get the most out of the day. I'm just going to hand over to Russell, and he's going to explain a little bit more about some of the speakers we've got, and just give a little bit of an overview before we kick off with the first presentation.
Thanks, James. Actually, it's interesting having 2 different approaches to visual aids here. You might actually think, that's a bit strange, aren't they competing with each other? But from my perspective, at least, no one is likely to buy both of these technologies. What works for one person will not work for another person, and they're actually completely complementary, in my view at least. But by all means, go and have a chat with the people in the rooms. They have much more knowledge than I do, and they're going to be here throughout the day, and you can just nip out and have a little consultation. So I'd like to welcome you all here, but also, just so that you know, in addition to the people that are attending here, we have quite a few people around the world who are connecting online to the conference. So we're live streaming this event over the internet. So welcome also to everyone outside the conference. We do have the facility, if we choose to use it, to accept questions from people who are tuning in from overseas. I think we're probably not going to have the time or the luxury, to be honest. So for the time being, I'm afraid you're all muted. If we get the chance to invite questions from outside the conference, we'll do so. I think We've got an incredible group of speakers here today. Actually, most of the people who are going to be speaking are in some way or another genuine heroes of mine for the very different reasons. And so I'm really delighted that we've got such a fantastic group here and that we can share that with people online and available for download afterwards. So our first speaker this morning, Nick Sireau, is someone who we can probably quite honestly say if it wasn't for Nick's efforts, we wouldn't have a society at all, because 3 of us who are the trustees now actually met at an event put on by Nick's organization, Findacure, which he'll tell you a little about later. And
muted.
Inevitably, over the course of the years that we've been doing all this stuff, I keep thinking...
Unmuted.
I keep thinking, what's the point? You know, why are we doing this? What can we possibly do as a small group in such a complicated world where surely there's someone else doing it for us? And then I think back to what Nick has achieved, and he'll tell you a little in the time he has of what he has achieved with his groups. And it gives me the encouragement to think, yeah, actually, as a patient group, we can make a difference. Not only we can make a difference, but we have to do it. We can choose to sit down and just relax and hope that someone comes up with the cure that we all want, or we can actually get involved and make that day come sooner and to be more sure. And I hope Nick is going to be speaking about a completely different disease, but exactly the same things that he overcame and have worked for him are the sorts of things that we can do. I think most of you will know of, or will know in some ways, Patrick U.Y. who initially probably thought I was the most difficult parent he'd ever encountered of a patient, and probably still does, because I'm a constant thorn in his side. But I have to say, he still speaks to me after all these years, and still answers the questions, and listens to what we have to say, which is something that I think is essential in a real doctor. We have Francois Houillet coming from, I'm sorry if I pronounced it wrongly, Francois. I'm trying to learn French at the moment, and I am awful. But Francois comes from an organization called Eurodis, which is a European rare disease umbrella group. So the LHON Society is a member of Eurodis, as are, I don't know, 800? How many organize it? How many? So heading towards 800 rare disease groups in Europe have affiliated with Eurodis. Again, for me, it's been a fantastic gateway to all sorts of activities that we have become involved in that are of benefit to patients. And Francois, again, will be talking a little bit about what Eurodis is doing, how that's benefiting patients, and how collaborating together we can achieve so much more than just trying to do things on our own. And then this afternoon we have Krista, who James briefly mentioned. Krista has been a pioneer in low vision rehabilitation. I've been dying to talk to him about eSight and OrCam and what he thinks of these technologies, and I hope I'll get the chance at some stage during the break to speak with Krista. But he's going to be talking about, as James said, the work they've done in Sweden. We've had, over the last couple of years, good contacts with a lot of the European groups. She's not speaking today, but she'll be on the panel a little later. We have Maryse Roger from the French group. I won't try and pronounce it. You can tell us later what it's called, Maryse, because no one will understand what I say. But there is a thriving LHON patient group in France, and we're trying to learn from each other and pick up the best of what each of us do, because we don't have enough time or bodies for all of us to do everything. So right now, we specialize where we think we can achieve the most, and we try and share that work with the other groups. And then last but not least, we have this afternoon Professor Patrick Chinnery, who is one of the leading mitochondrial experts in the world and a hugely respected figure throughout the NHS, who today is mostly going to be talking to us, I'm in a way surprised, but also really glad to say, about patient engagement and the importance of us all getting involved, because that's what it's really all about today. and not forgetting our panelists, because we will have a patient panel as we did last year. Very different mix this time. We had a bit of, we received a lot of comments about how to improve it, so we have a more balanced gender mix. We have some ladies on the panel today, and we have some very different experiences. So we aren't aiming to just repeat what we've done before because it worked well. We're trying to improve on it and present a different perspective. The purpose of today is to inform you all as much as possible about the condition, causes and treatments, and the research that's going on. It's also about living with LHON, what works, what doesn't work, and it's an opportunity not only for us to tell you what we know, but for you to share what you know and to help each other overcome some of the common problems and themes that you've come across. I think the really important thing to say is that we're all friends here. We are among friends. As James said, I hope that you can all stay, as many as possible this evening, for the social event, which is every bit as important as the formal talks that take place here. And actually, we're so delighted that we have the ability to do that. This is the second Patients' Day. As many of you know, we had the first one in Moorfields in London, which was an easier place to get to, but was a bit cramped, and we needed to spread out a bit more and have a slightly improved facility. We know that Cambridge isn't the easiest of places to get to for a lot of people, and so we've tried as far as we could to make it as accessible in every way as we possibly could. Another good reason for being here is that this is what is probably going to become the new UK Centre for LHON research. Not only Professor Chinnery is here already, but Dr. U.Y. Mann recently moved to Cambridge University from Newcastle. So whereas Newcastle was always known as the go-to place for LHON in the UK, actually it's now really Cambridge. So with Cambridge and its close proximity to London, we have a much closer centre, and it's, I think, going to be a great benefit for all of us. So we really wanted people to be able to come here. I have to say, I should acknowledge the fantastic support that we've had from the sponsors that have allowed us to put this event on. We have a lovely facility. I hope the lunch and the meal this evening will be every bit as good as the breakfast that some of us enjoyed this morning. And we have audio-visual facilities, lovely surroundings. We couldn't have done this without the sponsorship and support of the companies that are involved in research in this field. So in particular, Santerra, and we have a representative here from Santerra who is keen to know as much as she can about the condition from patients, because she's quite new to the company. We had support from Gencyte, who are the gene therapy company that some of you will have heard of, and a company that probably nobody has heard of here, or very few, Stealth Biotherapeutics, who are a US company also involved in research in LHON. And without that support, we'd be sitting in a crowded room, probably with poor acoustics, so that with nobody able to hear us. I'm going to try and move quickly. There's an awful lot happening about LHON research. There's so much going on. I could spend most of the day just myself talking to you, but to say that would be boring would be a bit of an understatement. There are a couple of things I do want to quickly mention, though. The first is something called ERNI. Don't worry about it. You probably have never heard of it until now. I hope you will be hearing more about it. The theme of today is really collaboration. The ERNI is a European reference network for rare eye diseases. It's an EU initiative. I know we hear so many bad things about the EU in the UK, but it's time that we actually reported some of the good things. And for this ERNI, there are 28 different medical establishments throughout Europe from 13 different countries. All of them centers of research into rare eye diseases. And all of those have come together into this consortium to share information, to pool research, and to make sure that they avoid duplication. It's such a huge project, we could spend a whole day on it just talking about that project alone. ultimately, it will lead to virtual clinics being established across Europe. One of the biggest problems with a rare disease of any type, and LHON is no different, is that people who live next door to Moorfields or Cambridge can go and see a specialist and can get the best attention straight away. The majority of people living in Europe and even in the UK don't get that access. People have to travel from the north of Scotland down to Cambridge. It's a major problem for them. This network, it's going to take a little time, but ultimately will allow consultations to take place online so that someone in the deepest part of Scotland can have a consultation with the best specialists throughout Europe for their condition. It isn't just happening in eye diseases, it's in a whole host of rare diseases. Francois may have time to tell you a little more about it in his talk, because this actually came from the work of Eurydice. If it wasn't for Eurydice's efforts, there would be no rare disease networks. As I say, I have several slides on this, but I will skip them all. Oops. In fact, I've lost my slides altogether, so that's okay, because it's probably about time for me to wrap up and introduce our first speaker for today, who, as I say, is really one of my heroes in the rare disease world, but to be honest, there are so many. And if I hand over the mic to Nick Sireau, who will tell us about his story.
Thank you. All right, you'll do it. Okay, hello, hi. So I'm Nick, and I am the father of two boys with an ultra-rare disease called alkaptonuria, or AKU for short. And they were diagnosed shortly after their birth. So what happened was, 16 years ago, we took our eldest son, Julian, back from the clinic. And we noticed after a few days that his nappies were going black. And we were very alarmed. And we said, what could this be? Could it be blood? What exactly is it? It was kind of a red, black color. And so we called an emergency doctor because it was on a Sunday. And the doctor came along. And he tested for blood. And he didn't find any. So then he asked us what had we eaten that day, and it so happened we'd had some red cabbage. And so he said, that's what it is. It's the red cabbage going into the breast milk, into the child, and into the urine. Now, we weren't very convinced by that. And next day, we went to see our GP, who eventually got a whole bunch of tests done, and it came back with a diagnosis of alkaptonuria, which is an ultra-rare disease. Affects roughly 1 in 500,000 to 1 in 1,000,000. So we know of roughly 60 to 100 patients in the UK, and so far there is no licensed treatment, even though it was the first genetic disease ever identified. There was a researcher called Sir Archibald Garrod, who in 1901 managed to prove that alkaptonuria was a hereditary disease, a kind of recessive gene, and through that, people started to understand that diseases could actually be hereditary and genetic. So he was quite a trailblazer. Do you have the... Okay, so what I'm going to explain to you in the next 20 minutes is a bit the different steps that we went through to grow the organization, to get money, around £20 million to do some clinical trials, and to bring that to where we're hopefully soon going to have a license for the disease. And what we did is really quite, can be done by many other charities, because it's the concepts that are important. The diseases are very different, but actually the barriers are often the same, as Russell said earlier on. One of the barriers is problem with diagnosis, diagnostic odysseys. Another kind of barriers is lack of access to finance. Another one is how to recruit patients into clinical trials. All these different things. So I'll explain the kind of different steps that we took to kind of get us to where we are now. So first of all, one of the most important things was working with scientists, clinicians, and industry to treat the disease. What we had when we started the AKU Society 15 years ago, even though the disease had been known for 100 years, there was no patient group. And there was very little research actually happening. There was a bit of research at the National Institutes of Health in the US, but that was really more or less it. So what we did first of all was characterize the disease. Even though it'd been known for a century, we hadn't developed the characteristics of the disease. So we developed what we called a tetrad, which is the 4 diagnostic criteria of the disease. And you have here, that's the black urine, or red black urine. The ears, the cartilage in the ears, which goes blue. In the eyes, kind of black spots. And this, if you can see, is an elbow of someone with the disease. It's completely black. That's why it's called black bone disease, basically. It's completely black. And what happens in the illness is that people's bones and cartilage will steadily disintegrate, going black, and then they'll just get more and more disabled as life progresses. And they'll also have heart problems and eye problems and all kinds of other things. We developed an animal model of the disease quite early on. There was no animal model. So what we did is we raised £500,000 from the big lottery fund, who about 10 years ago had a research grant scheme, and we developed this animal model. And no prize for anybody who spots which one is the AKU mouse. It's obviously this one. As you can see, the litter is all red-black. Very important to have a good animal model. I don't know if you guys have got animal models in LHON, but in AKU there were none. So this allows us to test new treatments. This allows us to kind of prove, you know, the evolution of the disease, to develop diagnostic criteria, etc. This is the metabolic pathway. So it's a simple one-gene genetic disease. And as you can see, at every part of the pathway, there are different enzymes. Alkaptonuria is due to a problem with this enzyme here, HPPD, and what it does is that leads to an increase of this product here, homogentic acid, which accumulates at 2,000 times the normal rate and binds to cartilage and bone and goes black in a process called ochronosis. And so what we are doing, see, these are all the different diseases along the way. You have phenylketonuria, which is an iconic rare disease. We have tyrosinemia type 1, which kills children by age 2. And there we have alkaptonuria. But the drug that we have developed is an enzyme inhibitor, which is here, okay, called nitisinone. Very interesting story of the drug. It was originally developed as a weed killer about 30 years ago by ICI. And they basically, the person who developed it saw that in his garden, around the Australian bottlebrush plant, there were no weeds. And so he said, well, why is that? And so he managed to isolate the compound and developed it as a weed killer. It wasn't a very good weed killer. But then what they realized is that it worked in the same metabolic pathway in plants as in humans, which is this metabolic pathway here. And it blocks this enzyme here, which stops the accumulation of the homogentic acid. So it makes a lot of sense, biochemically makes a lot of sense, and the animal model works absolute wonders. But the very difficult thing is actually to prove that to a point that regulators will be happy with. Because it's no use just going to regulators saying, we think it will work, it works in the animal. They want to see that it works in humans. And that's what we've been struggling to do, and hopefully we'll have done soon. This you can see is the urine. It goes black, and then it completely clears with the addition of nitisinone. So again, very powerful kind of medicine. And what we had to do is there were no clinical centres for alkaptonuria. There was no specialist centre. There were no kind of real specialists in the disease. So we recruited the help of a professor called Professor Ranganath, who is based in Liverpool and is an absolute hero of mine because he has really, without him, we would be nowhere because he managed to drag the NHS kicking and screaming into actually setting up a clinical trial and setting up a reference centre. And that was very important. So there's Ranga here. This is Bob Gregory, who is unfortunately passed away, but is the founder of the AKU Society, and as you can see, very severely disabled from the alkaptonuria. And these are some of our researchers and our patron at the opening of the Robert Gregory National Alkaptonuria Centre. So what we did 6 years ago is we answered a call for proposals from the NHS to set up a reference centre, and we were successful. It's funded to the tune of around £1 million a year, which actually saves the NHS money, because an untreated AKU patient costs much more to the NHS than a treated one, okay, because of all the problems with joint replacements and all those kinds of things. So that's how we made the case to the NHS. And then we developed a plan for 3 clinical studies. Because what happened was in 2006, the team at the National Institutes of Health started a phase 3 clinical trial. And unfortunately, in 2009, they did it with nitisinone. They announced at a conference that we'd organised in Siena, in Italy, that the trial had failed. So this was devastating for everybody. The patients who were on the trial were just like, this can't be true. They felt a difference. They really thought it was helping them. The clinicians and researchers around the world were like, my God, how are we ever going to kind of overcome this? And basically, people were starting to lose interest. The company that was involved just said, look, this is too complicated. We can't do alkaptonuria. It's a very slow progressive disease. People will start to get the clinical symptoms in their 20s and 30s and 40s. We can't do a 10-year clinical trial. We can't find the money for it. It's too rare. We're not going to make any money from it. And so basically, what happened is that the whole network started to dissipate. And so with Ranga, we kind of sat down and we said, well, we can't really let this happen, you know, because I was seeing my children, they're slowly getting older, and it was just like, if we don't do something now, it'll be too late. So what we did is set up a European consortium. So we traveled around Europe. We went to France, the Hôpital Necker in Paris. We went to Slovakia, in Piestiny, the National Institute for Rheumatic Disease. We went to Sweden to go and meet the company called Sobi, who owns the drug. We kind of lobbied them. What happened is I followed them around the orphan drug conferences. So I bought tickets to go to all these different orphan drug conferences and found out where their CEO was actually speaking and followed them around and eventually managed to convince them in the breaks and the coffee breaks and all that, that we had a credible team with which to do a clinical trial. So what we then also managed to do was recruit the help of a specialist in rare disease or orphan drug trials, a guy called Dr. Tony Hall, who runs a CRO called PSR Group. And he was instrumental in helping us actually define what we were going to do. And so it was a 3-stage study. Sonia 1, suitability of nitisinone alkaptonuria 1, Sonia 2, and Sophia, subclinical ophrenosis features in alkaptonuria. We put together the consortium, we put together an application to the European Commission for FP7, which was before Horizon 2020, which was the big grant scheme, and we got full marks. We got 15 out of 15. And without that, I don't think we'd have been funded, because there were more than 500 applications, and I think only 15 of them were actually successful. So it was very, very competitive. So the first thing, this is a phase 2 study, which we now completed 3 years ago. So if you know your phases in clinical studies, phase 1 is on healthy volunteers to see if the drug actually has any toxic effects or whatever. Phase 2 is to find the right dose of the disease, and phase 3 is when you do your study amongst the population with the illness to actually prove that it works. So we had to do a phase 2 study, and it was very successful, allowed us to identify the dose of the disease, 10 milligrams, that we were then going to use in the phase 3 study, which is here, which is in 3 clinical trial centres in the UK, in Slovakia, and in France. Why Slovakia? They have a very high number of the disease, around 200 to 300 patients, because of what's called a founder effect, where the disease is very prevalent in a community in Slovakia in the northwest of the country. And they have now a centre which is actually looking into kind of studying the disease. So the phase 3 trial, we had to do it over 4 years, and we had to do it on 140 patients overall. Why so many? There's the original study at the NIH had been on 40 patients. The problem with rare disease is you need enough patients to actually prove that it works, to have the statistical power to prove that it works. So we went to see a statistician in University of Liverpool, and we said, we want you to make this clinical trial as difficult as possible, okay? So that when we actually manage to prove something, no one will be able to deny that we've actually done it. So he said, okay, you need 140 patients over 4 years. Now, 140 patients, we knew of 60 roughly in the UK, maybe 300 across Europe, a lot of them children. It was going to be a tough kind of number to reach. So what we did is, this was the consortium. As you can see, there's the Royal Liverpool University Hospital, which is the coordinator. We have Sobi, which is the company, and these are all the different kind of, and 2 patient groups, ALCAP in France, which was set up by my parents, and the AKU Society in the UK. Whoops. This is the group itself. But what we managed to do was recruit 138 patients. We didn't quite make the 140, but we recruited 138. We were very pleased about that. And to do that, we again had to travel around Europe. We had to set up patient groups in Slovakia, in Italy, in France, in Sweden, in the Netherlands, in Germany, and all these different things, working with the patients, and really try and recruit patients. Because you have all these inclusion-exclusion criteria in clinical studies, which means that it's not everybody who can join. They have to be over 25. They have to have this, that, and the other. It makes it very restrictive and very difficult to recruit. And most clinical studies fail because they don't recruit enough patients. So we knew this was important, and we put a lot of time, a lot of resources, and a lot of effort into actually recruiting these patients. And then keeping them, because we don't want to have too many dropping out. So far, we've had 11 drop out, mainly due to kind of adverse events which are not actually linked to the treatment. 1 or 2 of them because of side effects from the treatment, but we're still at 127, which is still very good. We need more than 120, actually, to make it statistically feasible. And this is the kind of thing that the patients say. These trials have given us great hope. This treatment could completely change our lives. We're that 1 step closer to a cure, you know, from one of the Belgian patients. Very difficult decision in the trial. When we went to see the European regulator, the EMA, European Medicines Agency, with our ideas for the trial, they were like, well, you need to make it randomized. But you can't give people a placebo, because people can immediately know if they're on the drug or not. They just need to go and pass urine. And if their urine is clear, they know they're on the drug. So you can't give a placebo because it just won't work. So we have a no treatment group and we have a treatment group. And that's quite difficult because the no treatment group, for 4 years, they can't have the treatment, so they're making a hell of a commitment, but all this to be able to prove beyond any doubt that the drug actually works, So there's all these kind of difficult ethical dilemmas when you do a clinical trial. So working with patients around the world, this is our database of patients, roughly 1,000 patients known. And we have, you can see these hotspots, so Slovakia, which I mentioned, Jordan, a high number of patients there. We now have 70 in Jordan, and that was really quite an odd discovery. There's a lot of chance and luck and bad luck, I think, in rare diseases. But what happened there is the guy who was, who's now heading the patient group, who's a researcher in Jordan, was actually spending time in Liverpool, and he was in the lab next to ours, and he found out about alkaptonuria, and then he went home, and then one of his cousins told him about his symptoms, and he diagnosed him with alkaptonuria, went back to his village, and managed to diagnose more than 50 patients with the illness, again due to consanguinity. And that's why there are quite a few patients in the Middle East, in Qatar also 40, and I think in Saudi Arabia, and also in India, in a small community in the south of India, many patients, we visited the group there in a village, many patients, all stooped with the black spots in their eyes and struggling to walk and everything, again due to consanguinity, a high number of patients with the disease. But you can see that, in the USA we have 90, in the UK we have 64, Russia, in South America, we have a few more now in South America, and they've actually set up a patient group in Brazil. So these are all the different patient groups that we've managed to set up. So UK, France, Italy, Germany, Netherlands, Jordan, India, Slovakia, North America, Belgium, Sweden, and in Asia in progress. And this is very important because we found if people actually want to start doing some lobbying locally, if they want to actually work also with pharma companies or whatever, you need to have created an actual patient group that they can interact with. And this is the campaign we did a few years ago, Help Us Cure Black Bone Disease. What we realized is that if we wanted to really raise money from the public, we had to show just how stark the disease could actually get. And that's why we use the name black bone disease, because people can actually immediately, they can't pronounce alkaptonuria. AKU, a bit better with black bone disease, is very kind of visual. And these are some of the patients who helped us with the campaign. This is Anne, who is a patient with the disease in the UK. And we basically had a global crowdfunding campaign which allowed us to raise some money to actually pay for patients' relatives to accompany them to the clinical study. And this is some of our patients, including this patient here, Brenda, who was diagnosed. She thought she was the only person in the UK with the illness. And then her husband read an article about us in the Daily Mirror. She contacted the journalist who contacted us, and within 2 weeks she was at the centre and on the drug. And developing new therapies, very important. We don't just have this molecule, nitisinone, we're also looking at gene therapies, enzyme therapies, and all these different therapies, which are much more early stage, and where we've been trying to get funds from the European Union, without much luck, actually, at the moment. Sharing with other patient groups, you'll hear from François from Eurordis, but Eurordis have been absolutely fantastic for us because they have laid the groundwork which allows us to do this. So Eurordis work on a pan-European level. They have been doing all the things like for the legal changes, for the laws, and all that kind of stuff on rare diseases. A lot of the lobbying, which has raised awareness about it, encouraging companies to get involved. Without that, we'd be working in an absolute desert. But with them, we've really managed to scale some heights. And then Findacure. So what happened also was I was being quite frequently rung up by people who were saying, how do we do the same in our patient group? How do we set ourselves up? How do we raise funds? How do we go over all these barriers? How do we work with industry? How do we work with academics, etc.? So with friend Tony Hall, we set up Findacure, which is now 4 years old and which is a charity really for rare disease patient groups. And it does two things. The first thing it does is training for rare disease groups, so trainings in all these different aspects, peer mentoring also, but training workshops, etc. And the other thing is drug repurposing, because what we've done here with nitisinone is we've used a drug that was used for one condition, tyrosinemia type 1, and we've proven that it can work for alkaptonuria. So that's called drug repurposing. And the good thing about using a drug that's already been approved or whatever is that you can accelerate the fast-track the process because a lot of the safety studies have already been done. So with Findacure, what we do is we look for drugs out there that have already been approved for one condition, and we try and show through clinical studies how they can be used for another condition. And that's not easy because your drug will often be off patent, so there'll be no intellectual property. So it'll be off patent, so drug companies won't necessarily be that interested. But if you can raise the funds, you can actually end up with a much more affordable clinical development program. So that's what Findacure is doing, and they're based also here in Cambridge. And if you're interested, with Tony, we edited a book called The Patient Group Handbook a practical guide for research and drug development. And it's got chapters from all the leaders in the rare disease sector, from Eurordis, from different groups and all that, from some pharma companies, etc. And it's a how-to, it's a toolkit, basically, to help people, because a lot of what we face as challenges have already been faced before. And the thing to do is to go and see who has managed to successfully overcome that challenge, what can we learn from them, and what can we then apply to our patient group. Thank you.